Thank you for joining us on this episode of MSP 1337, a podcast dedicated to helping MSPs and their clients navigate cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a journey, but it doesn't mean you have to travel alone. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, PCmatic, endpoint security built on a zero trust, default deny philosophy, allowing only trusted sources and blocking all the rest. Lightweight, simple to deploy, easy to manage, and compatible with all major antivirus products. Find out about PCmatic's unique lead sharing program for MSPs, backed by a primetime national TV campaign. Together, we bring advanced security solutions combined with more than sales enablement. We bring actual leads. Find out more about PCmatic by visiting pcmatic.com/MSP. Now on with the show. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of MSP 1337. This week, I'm joined by Joe Ambrosole of NetConnect. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. Joe, we go back a long time with MSP-Ignite to the original peer group, the first ever MSP-Ignite beta. And as we look back over the last, 8 or 10 years, there's been a few things that have changed. Sure. Obviously, I'm not in an MSP anymore, but in giving back to the community of MSP-Ignite and the MSP community at large, I've had the opportunities to work with many MSPs on things like policies. And today's episode, we're talking about the necessity of policies, particularly in cybersecurity. I would argue that every business needs policies of some kind. We wouldn't call outsource HR or have HR if we didn't. And I would like to talk specifically today about what are the demands that are being put on you, Joe, or MSPs in general when it comes to the necessity of a policy of any kind. And then let's talk through or overcoming these like obstacles and hurdles that you and I were talking about earlier.
Sure, of course. Well, first, Chris, let me start by saying joining the MSP-Ignite group has allowed me, right, giving me the direction of putting together these policies. And to me, I am not a technical person. I sometimes find this policy writing very hard and difficult. So I rely on the group, my peer group, and you to help guide me and direct me into putting together the policies and the procedures that are needed for these controls. Okay.
So this is going to be the most exciting topic and episode by and large that we've done to date because we're talking about policies.
Yeah, yes. I don't find them exciting, but I find them difficult to write. But it needs to be done because and it just seems that every industry that we're in being pushed into the policies either by their industry, by their insurance company. Many different factors are forcing these policies being written. We do a lot of work with the New Jersey housing authorities, a lot. We have probably 10 clients in New Jersey housing authorities. And you know what? If you don't have policies, you can't get insurance. The insurance companies need to make sure that you have a set amount of policies, a set amount of controls in place. So we as a company who have 10 clients in that group are now forced to write these policies to make sure that our clients meet these controls.
So here's a loaded question along those lines. I actually commented on a LinkedIn post. I think it was, now I can't remember who the post was, but it was talking about should an MSP require their clients to have insurance, like cybersecurity insurance, or, a lot of our clients are now coming to us with these questionnaires like, do you have policies for this? Do you have insurance and coverage for that? There's a full circle here, right? Because if you're being asked these questions or you can't get insurance if you don't have these policies, but shouldn't we want our clients to have some level of insurance? I mean, think about cars, and there's nothing worse than getting into a car accident unless you factor in it can be worse when, say, the car that hit you, especially when it's their fault, doesn't have insurance.
That's right. That's right.
I think this
So,
is the same space, right?
yeah. Yeah. We talk to all of our clients, every one of them, about insurance and making sure they have cyber insurance, loss of business insurance, E&O, D&O insurance. It should be cyber insurance, fraud insurance should be standard in today's environment, right? I mean, I don't think any business should go a day without some sort of cyber insurance. So we speak to them, and we'll even get them on the phone with our broker, right? Not that they have to use our broker, right? They can continue where they are, right? But we just want to explain to them the importance of having that insurance.
Which comes back to, in many cases, if you don't have policies and procedures in place that are documented, it makes a lot of insurance brokers squeamish, because we've seen the evidence in the media and culturally what's happening around the world, that breaches are happening. And I would venture to say that a little policy and effort procedurally would have gone a long way in preventing some of those catastrophic events from happening.
Yes. It goes back down. It goes to the employees, right? You have to speak to them.
Right.
I mean, that's up to the business owner, right? And it's really up to the business owner, but it needs to be pushed by the MSP, right? To tell the business owner what is needed when it comes to IT. Business owners, they know their architectural, they know their engineering, they know their business, right? But when it comes to IT, it's up to us to tell them what is needed and what is actually happening in our industry.
So it kind of comes back to, thinking through some of these things. It's like, what are my responsibilities, both as an MSP and as a client of an MSP, when we talk about, we're all people, right? So we're all potentially the weakest link.
Yeah,
we are. So we put these things in place to help reduce some of that bluntness, if you will, if something happens. Like, it's not as painful because you've got some things in place to help you with that recovery. But again, we're not even talking about doing this just because, or to, hey, have a payout so that we don't have to worry about the security side of it. I think what happens, and this is why I think it's really important, the request of an insurance company to say, please provide me with your policies and procedures, isn't because they're using that to say yay or nay for insurance. By you going through the exercise, they know that you have skin in the game and you understand the risks of what's going to happen and why you got insurance.
Yeah. So, we are not just IT providers anymore.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you go in looking at yourself as an IT provider, you're shortchanging what you're doing. Right? You're an IT provider. You are a business consultant. You need to help them with their insurance, right? You need to be a guiding. You need to be a guiding light, right? To make sure that something happens, it's coming back to you. So you have to have all the processes and procedures and policies in place to make sure that not only are you covered, but your client is covered. Because at the end of the day, an insurance company can say no to an insurance claim.
Right.
Right. And if you do not have all the proper paperwork in place, then they can just say no, and then you're stuck.
Which goes back to, I don't think there's any perfect policy. There isn't any perfect storm with regards to how claims are processed, because this is a really big, every scenario is different, right? This isn't like my swimming pool flooded my basement and I don't have flood insurance because it was my swimming pool. Tomorrow it's a swimming pool. The next day it's a hurricane. The next day, I mean, places that would never have natural disasters, the cybersecurity space is, tomorrow it's a new disaster. Do you think that we're putting ourselves in a position that maybe the IT space is actually its own thing now, where the position to be in is, like you said, the guiding light. You could build a business around helping other businesses make sure that they have the appropriate IT in place, the appropriate as a separate thing altogether from being a traditional MSP.
Yeah, I think the more mature MSPs actually do that today, right? That's why they are more successful. That's why they make more money.
Right.
They provide that, and providing that guiding light allows them to dictate that $175, $200, $225 per desktop, right? Because
Right.
you're giving more than just IT.
Right. One can argue anybody can turn a screwdriver, but can you, go pick the right screwdriver out of a set of 20 so that you don't damage the screw?
That's right.
So shifting gears a little bit back to the policies and sort of the burden of responsibility is obviously a big one that comes into play because every MSP knows that they need some of them because we talk about it all the time. One that comes to mind is acceptable use. I mean, your HR department, whether you outsource it, you are it, all the above, you have requirements already in place. So talk to me about policies that you already use, employee handbooks, that kind of thing, and then we'll segue back to cybersecurity because I think it'll make it easier.
So we do have employee handbooks, and that was written by our payroll company. But we do offer acceptable use policies to our clients. Well, first of all, let me step back. We use a product called CyberHoop, and it allows us to push out the policies, right directly to the client.
Yep.
Right to the ownership or to the HR department, whoever we're responsible or reporting to. Okay, and they can take those policies, rebrand them as their own, and push them out to their clients using to their employees. I'm sorry. And they're using the same cyber, right? So now compliance is met.
Yeah, it actually made me think, like, what if so just thinking about what you said, obviously that's the value proposition that is Cyberhoot, but another piece to this too is we talk about MSPs and policies that you need internally, right? Like, because you are a business no different than your clients or businesses, but those policies that you put together, in some respects, the owners of the clients that you're working with, should they not sign off and recognize that the policy that you use internally is now a factor because you have your hands in their environment? Should they not go, oh, wow, this is the policy that, NetConnect has for passwords or secure baseline configurations that are being applied to our environment? Because if they're not, are they not now part of your entity when we think about the tools and the intertwining that happens when we start connecting? It's almost like having these businesses that are your clients. They're kind of like departments all in the same building, right? And so you're sharing a virtual technical space of some kind.
Yeah. So the policies, let's just use acceptable use policy.
Yep.
If we have an acceptable use policy that is standard and that we like and we've written, and all of that is true because we have one.
Right.
We take that policy and we can push that policy out to 8, 10, 12, 15 different clients, whatever the number is, whoever wants that policy, right? Now, that policy is the same policy. It's the same across the board. All of our clients have that policy.
Sure.
We know how to maintain the client, all 15 clients that we just push that policy out to.
Right.
Password policy, right? We dictate that have, let's just say 14 different characters, right?
Right.
All 15 clients need to have 14 characters, right? Lowercase, uppercase, whatever the policy is. So that means that we look at that client or those clients and we know that they are under our policy control.
Right.
So it makes it much easier for us to maintain those 15 clients than having this has 8 password, the 8 characters, 12 characters, 14 characters.
Yeah, you've got policy standardization, which means that now when you manage infrastructure, you don't have to recreate from scratch group policy objects and that kind of thing, because
No.
you're getting into a pattern, a routine that is repeatable across those clients. And we all know there's exceptions, but so talk to me a little bit about, obviously employee handbook. I love that one as an example, because if you look at an employee handbook, it's often full of policies, right? Like lots of them. In fact, acceptable use often is inside of an employee handbook. I've seen BYOD in there. I've seen acceptable use of the internet. Like, just the list is pretty broad. Like, I will not use work computers for personal gain, right?
Right.
So now we take that and we shift into the gear a little bit to what I would call cybersecurity policies that we've gotten really specific on, because I think you could say like disaster recovery, business continuity, those are all extremely important policies to have, but they're more operational, they're more business driven than, say, cybersecurity. So in the cybersecurity world, you've got controls that say, asset inventory, software inventory, and how those things are managed. Talk to me a little bit about your concerns around trying to build these policies and what to map them to, and maybe what like your biggest hurdle is.
Yeah. I think I'm the biggest hurdle, to tell you the truth, because you're taking a guy or a guy, and you're asking him to write these policies and map them to different procedures, and the procedures need to be mapped to the policies. And I'm trying to, it's difficult for me to see what the end result is going to be, right, when I start writing them, right? I stopped speaking because I saw you somewhere else.
I'm back. I'll fix it. I can cut that out. So
repeat the question.
So to repeat the question, since I went off into la la land, the question is the burden, or for lack of a better word, what is the biggest hurdle faced by a business owner, particularly an MSP like you are, in getting policies written?
It's trying to understand them, Chris. I mean, it's trying to sit down. I go home sometimes. I have a headache trying to write these things. It's difficult to write. It's difficult to get this information. Now, you and I have spoken about this, right?
Yep.
We have all done these policies in the past. We've done them, right?
Yep.
We've tried to get our clients. We've done the same thing time and time again with our clients, right? It's ingrained in us,
right?
But it's trying to get that information out of our head on paper and put it in a place where it's easy, it's acceptable, and us, our company, and our clients can understand.
Well, and you're describing what isn't a unique problem to business owner. I mean, here, let's just put this in perspective. We all struggle with documentation. There's products out there like IT Glue, MSP, Passportal MSP, and others that are designed around helping you capture information. And for some strange reason, we feel that is a better approach to my Microsoft Word doc or Notepad. And I'm not saying that to trivialize those vendors' products. They're very valuable and extremely powerful in what we do. Sure. Even a PSA is a way to add documentation, right? They store configs. So then you look at it on the other side of the coin, and you've got vendors out there like Compliancy Helper and CIO Toolbox, and all these different vendors that are defining a space around helping you answer questions to satisfy controls. There's no one magic bullet or the traditional easy button, but there will continue to be a growth in this space because there's this magical illusion that says if I buy something, that somehow it will do it for me. And the reality is, it takes a lot of the lift out. It really does. It makes a lot of this easier. I mean, like you said, even working with the secure outcomes through MSP-Ignite, we're helping you with templates that are already ready to go. And
Yeah.
yet we're still struggling to adapt and mold them to our businesses because it is hard, not the policy part, the making it my policy part.
It's just trying to get it out of your head and onto the paper, or even if it's on the paper, right? I don't like that policy or procedure. I want to change it, but I don't even know how to change it. I mean,
Like what? Yeah. What do you change it to?
right, right. We don't do that, but okay, but I want to add something to this document. What is it, right? And we're going to go through this, Chris, with the housing authorities that I
Sure.
talked about before, because they want a certain policy in place, right? They're
So
going to
what
want.
policy did they ask for? Just curious.
I don't know.
Okay.
This just came out. We just
Sure.
got the document yesterday. Okay. So I don't know. Right. But I do know that we have to have certain policies in order to work with the housing authorities of New Jersey.
Sure. So I'll give an example for the listeners. That would be, since we don't know the one yet from the housing authority. So a lot of listeners have clients that are now trying to comply with CMMC, NIST 171. And what's interesting is, as the MSP, we really aren't directly bound by those frameworks, but that doesn't mean we aren't in the supply chain and need to do a lot of things that might get called out and have to also provide, documentation, policy, and procedure. And the reason why I think it gets interesting is, you're not going to just go and write something down, but you might have something in place already if you've done, say, some of the policies and some of these controls have been satisfied. When that gets put in your face and says, hey, please sign this, please show proof of, you're well on your way to putting something in place that satisfied those requests. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think it's crazy that we go back in time to when the omnibus rule was written, and they defined that data needs to be encrypted at rest and in transit. And now a lot of frameworks have similar language about encryption of data. But what I find ironic is no one really defined how granular that needed to be. They got into, it needs to be at least, say, 256-bit encryption, some other variables with that, but then how it's supposed to get applied, no one really articulated that. And it's interesting because if you go back to 2013 and you think about encryption then, which is when the omnibus rule went into effect, it was complicated to do a lot of the things that we were being asked to do. And so I think many MSPs trying to adopt these complicated tool sets and implementing with their clients, you are risking addressing and being compliant with being able to stay effective with security as your clients look for ways to circumvent and go around, because the complexity got in the way of productivity. So you fast forward to where we are today, and while we can have complicated policies and controls, the reality, the tools we use to document, the tools we use to implement and manage, those aren't complicated like they were 10 years ago. And they work.
And they work.
Yeah.
They didn't work 10 years ago.
No, they did not. I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember my first experience with ConnectWise during the implementation with Mr. Bellini. That was an interesting experience. And I'm not saying it didn't work, but things that would work one way and we expected it to work another way was a lot of productivity loss, to us. But over time, we became really effective with the tool, and we learned to accept the nuances. And suddenly, 20 years later, it is a really impressive resource to any MSP. And I don't say that to say, oh, go use ConnectWise. I mean, I know there's Autotask and there's TigerPond, there's other products out there, but the reality is, when these products were created, they were designed and built to solve problems for the company that built them. And they had to adapt and evolve to make these become products that fit for everybody else, which goes back to policies.
Yeah. So I'll tell a quick story. I was actually the number 3 client of ConnectWise.
Wow.
Yeah. So and I lived through all of that, right? I lived through the pain of that and the enable pain of, because I was one of the early adopters of enable. So I saw all I felt that, and I saw it. But to me, policies, IT policies were not in play at that time, right?
No.
They weren't there. No one even thought about them. I mean, in fact, if you think about 2 years ago, how many IT policies were really there? It's only recent that we're being pushed.
I think the argument could be made is that we used to have just workflows that defined how to do things effectively and efficiently.
Yes.
And the reality is a policy is capturing that and making sure the workflow does not conflict with why the policy is being created.
But those workflows were based on how we ran our company, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Today, you not only need those workflows, you need the policies for yourself, and you need to push those policies out to your clients as well.
Right. So one of the things that comes up a lot is my clients are asking for a policy. Do I give it to them? Do I charge them for it? I would argue that there's two elements to this. One, if you don't already have the policy internally in place, it's pretty tough to be effective at selling that. Primarily because if you haven't adopted it yet, you don't know what the nuances are in using it, right? Like there may be some serious changes for it to work with you and your clients. And then the second part of that is anytime you give somebody something for free, the value proposition, particularly when it comes to policies, is that it's not a big deal. And I'm not saying that to say you have to charge for a policy. It's more that the value proposition, when you basically give that to them, is making sure that the understanding is in place that says this is an extremely valuable template, but it's only valuable in how it gets executed. So if you're not willing to go in and make sure that the bullet points are relevant to your business, if you're not going through and making sure that your staff is willing to sign off and say, hey, I read this policy, I can agree to this policy. And then obviously the tail end of that is when it's executed, do we have evidence that we can walk backwards to the policy and procedures to prove that we got it?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to get into should you charge or give away those types of things. But again, I come back to the value proposition is you've got to be able to articulate and get clarity of understanding that this document is bigger than just a piece of paper with bullet points on it.
Yes. So we look at policies as we separate them in two categories. First category is, let's say, a password policy. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That is an IT policy.
Yep.
Right? That's, you have to have X amount of characters, and you have to have this and that, and you can't use the password for, every 60 days you have to replace it or change it, and you can't use the last 12 months. That's a policy, right? That's
sure.
An IT policy. Acceptable use policy can be looked as a business policy.
Absolutely.
Right? It's more than just IT. Yeah, you'll have an email policy in there, and you might have internet policy in there instead of having separate documents for those. But the acceptable use policy can be looked at as a business policy, and you might want to charge for that, depending on the how you get along with the client, and if it's and.
So, Joe, to clarify, I think what you're saying is that there are policies that are going to be provided to a client because this is how, as the MSP, you're executing in their environment, and they need to sign off and say, yes, I'm going to abide by this policy. I'm
sorry, the employee has to sign off on that document.
Right. So this is sort of twofold, I think, because I was thinking about this and like, man, you're really putting yourself in a great position on an MSA agreement and limitation of liability when you put in front of a client the password policy or these policies that are going to be needed to be successful and you as the MSP managing them. And then you find out that 4 employees are refusing to sign the password policy. You've got the documented proof that says they're choosing negligence or ignorance over, doing this. I think that's a big win. I think that's a value proposition that I don't know that you can put a price tag on it.
And we do it through Cyberhoop. Right. So even the client uses Cyberhoop to push out. So if their employee doesn't want to sign off on it, then it becomes the CEO's problem.
Right.
Because I provided that document.
I think this comes back to why, not to come full circle, but we just did. In fact, you think about the insurance requirements that maybe an MSP needs to be asking for proof of the client. This is a perfect example of if there was a breach that's tied to a weak password that was tied to an end user with stuff like this already in place, that's a pretty good segue to be, hey, we're not liable as the MSP and we can prove it, which I understand when it comes to breaches or any of the things tied to cybersecurity, it may not have any bearing whatsoever on the outcome.
Mhm.
But I would rather steer towards I can have some control, whether I do or not, and have it come out that like, well, if we'd only done the following things, we wouldn't have been also on the hook.
Yeah. And I will tell you, Chris, that sometimes the existing clients, ones that we have for years, have a hard time sometimes with these policies because they understand that, well, they had a nice and easy before. Now
Right.
we're pushing the policies down to them, and they see that they're on the hook for some of this.
It's finally, it's not somebody else's problem anymore. I was talking to an MSP the other day, and they were talking about, when to run away from. Actually, I was talking to Ken May. We were
Mhm.
talking about when do you run away from an opportunity, a prospect? It's when that prospect says, we're just looking for a company that really gets IT, and you could fill in a lot of blanks there. And they go, and then they add to that, we've gone through 10 MSPs in the last 11 years. Run, right? Like there's never going to be a good MSP for that equation, because probably by and large there was something tied to here's what we're going to do and here's what you have to do, right? So at any rate, this has been a great conversation. I know that there are a lot of people out there that are struggling with policies by and large, regardless of whether or not they're related to cybersecurity or a business continuity plan. The one thing that everybody needs to remember, though, is that policies have existed for decades in the HR space. And like Joe was saying, it's only been the last few years where we've really seen the drivers to say that it's important that we have policies in these other categories, these other arenas. And so we know that this isn't something that's just going to happen overnight. But if you are involved in MSP-Ignite and you're part of this, you're looking to be getting policies written and done, get involved with Secure Outcomes. And if you're an MSP that's not part of the peer group space, or you have a peer group of your own already, I encourage you to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Follow the podcast. We constantly are giving tips and tricks that will help you with policy management. And yeah, that's the goal here. So Joe, yeah, one more thing.
One more thing for those MSPs that are struggling writing these policies, you're not alone.
That's
Don't
right.
don't worry about it. Just keep
Keep plugging away. Keep
That's it.
plugging away. Joe, again, appreciate you being on the show today. This has been an episode of MSP 1337. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.